Hello, everyone, and welcome to Christianity Now, the podcast where we don't take any bets, but we talk to vets. Huh? And and now you know our theme for the day. I'm Josh Ziefel, and I'm the host of Christianity Now and Dean of the College of Ministry here at Northwest University. And with me is my friend Michael Cumming. Hello, Mike.
Hey.
Wearing his Mariners shirt. In addition to everything else, he is a diehard Mariners fan.
Shucks, yeah.
Yeah. So it is now June 12th when we're recording. How many games have you been to this year already?
I've been to 18 now.
All right. There you go. I've been to 2. So, and I guess that's good because I'm not even a Mariners fan. So, All right. Well, today we are going to be talking about veterans ministry, in particular, an organization or a group called Venture Vets that has come up out of my church and the church that Michael attends, Venture Church in Mill Creek, Washington. We'll get to all that in a little bit and hear more about Mike. But first of all, Mike, a question that I ask every podcast, which is this: who is Jesus Christ for us today? And I'll reframe it for you a little bit. Let me ask you this: who is Jesus Christ for veterans today in 2024?
Well, first, for veterans and everyone, Jesus Christ is the only way back to the Father. But for veterans, it's specifically, it's where we can find our identity after the military. It's where we can define who we are post-military. It's where we can find our purpose and our mission after the military, and that bigger thing that we're living for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Mike, tell us a little bit about your story. You and I have talked a little bit over coffee from here and there, but tell us a little bit about your story about, your story in the military, your story of faith, and even leading up to I'll ask the question, and then leading up to kind of when Venture Vet started.
Sure.
So, what's your background? What's your testimony?
So, grew up going to Baptist church.
Okay.
I think if you would have asked me back in the day if I was saved and I knew Jesus, I would have said yes. In hindsight, I think I grew up in the church and I knew the answers, but I didn't really have a relationship.
Okay.
Always wanted to join the Marine Corps since I was a little kid.
By the way, folks, I should say Mike is a 22-year veteran service member, 4 years in the Marines, 18 years in the Army. He retired as Sergeant First Class. So just want to say that to make sure I didn't miss it. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I knew from first grade that I wanted to be a Marine, specifically a Marine. And that's what I did. I went to boot camp 3 days after I graduated high school.
Wow.
That was in 2000. So I was pre 9/11. So went through boot camp, went through all my training, ended up getting stationed back up here at Naval Submarine Base Bangor.
Okay.
Because Marine Corps Infantry does the security there.
Oh, all right.
For the national assets.
I wonder what those assets could be.
Yeah. I won't talk about them on the podcast, but I think a quick Google search can let everybody know what those are. So, so I ended up there. It was supposed to be a 2-year duty, and then you go to the regular infantry. But as we know, I was about a year prior to 9/11, little over a year prior to 9/11.
Yeah.
So when 9/11 happened, my world changed drastically overnight.
Yeah.
And everybody that was at Subbase Bangor, because of what's there, got stop, lost, stop, moves. That essentially means you didn't go to another duty station and you didn't get out of the military until the military said you could. Which I ended up doing my entire 4 years in the Marines at Subbase Bangor.
Okay.
Which is unusual. And I was frustrated.
Yeah.
And I should say, I think when I joined the Marine Corps, my faith, or my background of faith, quickly went out the window when I started just hanging out with young Marines and doing everything that young Marines do. So 4 years, and I was frustrated because I got stuck there. I wanted to go fight. I wanted to go see the world. I wanted to
Yeah.
train and do all
Well,
the
especially post 9/11, there was a lot of that. Like, I want to be involved doing something like active. I imagine.
yeah. So I got out.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I was out for like a couple of months and missed it like crazy.
Wow. Okay.
Specifically the brotherhood and the camaraderie.
Yeah.
And so I went to the local Marine Corps recruiter and asked him if I could get back in. He's like, yeah, we can get you back in. It was going to take like 6 months because the Marine Corps is the smallest. So you got to wait for spots to open up. And so I had to wait
Okay.
for a spot to open up for me. So it was
Yeah.
probably be about 6 months. So I walked out of his office, and the Army recruiter's office was next door, and he was in there waving me in. So I went in to see what he had to say. And he's like, so you trying to join the Marines? I was like, well, I'm trying to get back in the Marines. He's like, well, what'd they say? They said it's going to be 6 months. He's like, oh, well, what was your MOS, your job? I was like, infantry. He's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, I'll have you in 2 weeks. And so he did, because I was like, well, once a Marine, always a Marine. So why re-enlist? I'll go in the Army now.
I'm already a Marine, so yeah.
Yes. So after the Army, I went for
Okay.
the next 18 years.
Wow. Wow. So while you were, so obviously you're 4 years at Bangor at the with the assets, so to speak. In your 18 years in the Army, uh, what where were you? You were deployed, I think, in Iraq at one point. Is this correct?
Yeah, a couple times to Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Afghanistan at all, or just Iraq?
No, I was Iraq only. Iraq was my playground, my vacation spot.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beachside vacation, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Just lots of sand. Yeah. Okay. So so how recently? You're just recently retired, just the last few years, right?
Yeah, I retired in 2022.
Okay. All right. Well, wow, 22 years. So, well, thank you for your service. It's a sacrifice at any time, but certainly during wartime, during the years that you were you were in, there was a lot there. Okay, you talked a little bit about this. You grew up in Baptist church, felt like, in retrospect, maybe didn't have a living faith, or maybe as deep a faith as you feel like you do now.
Yeah.
Um, you talked about kind of walking in the far country, to use the analogy of the parable of the prodigal son, while you were in the Marines. What was the shape of your faith in the Army, and then especially at the end of that time? And I mean, you're pastoring a ministry at a church now. How did you get from kind of walking away from your faith in your Marine years to pastoring a veterans group now?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I got down to Fort Hood is where I got stationed first in the Army
Okay.
in Texas. And I don't know, I got down there, and so I should say at this point in time, I was already married with a 1-year-old daughter.
Okay.
So I got down there. I went down first to try and find housing for us, and kind of get
Yeah.
things set up, and then they came down a little bit later. So when I got down there, I was at the in-process briefing at the base, and there was this organization called the Soldiers Hospitality House that came in and talked about what they provide the soldiers there at the base. And they're essentially like this house that was open for the soldiers to come to, and like have like Bible studies and things like that. And so I started plugging in with them a little bit,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I didn't know anybody, and they opened their house for food and community. So I started hanging out there, and I kind of was like, yeah, I should get back into the church. So back then we still had something called phone books. So I opened up a phone book to churches, and I just started at the top. And the first one was Bethel Temple Assembly of God.
Go Assembly of God. Good job going with the A's there, guys.
Yeah,
You never would have come to Zephel Assembly of God, though. So that just would have been right out of
right.
yeah. Sorry, that's it.
So I showed up at this Bethel Temple Assembly of God church,
Okay.
and it was a really, really small
Okay.
church. But I plugged myself in and started to, I think, find faith for real for the first
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And then my faith really became real for me probably about a year after that when um, I was in Iraq. So
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, at what point? How many years ago was that? That sort of like renewed experience came in.
so that was probably about 2005.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, and then eventually you found yourself here in the greater Seattle area. How long have you been here in this area then?
I've been in the Seattle area for about 4 years now.
Okay, 4 years now. Now we talked just before this. Venture Vets as an organization is about 2 years old, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I guess the big question is, first of all, what is Venture Vets? We've referenced it a little bit. Our church is named Venture, of course, and we know what vets
Hmm.
are. But what is Venture Vets? Describe it to someone. Like if I come up to you and maybe I'm a veteran and I say, "Hey, I hear you have this Venture Vets group." How do you describe it to someone? What is it?
Yeah. So we're a place where veterans are able to find community and
Hmm.
brotherhood, find hope, find purpose through the foundations of faith.
Okay.
And what makes us different from most of the other veteran ministries I've seen is I most of the veteran ministries that I've seen are kind of like retreat style. Like you go to them, spend a couple of weeks,
Okay.
deal with some things, get some
Yeah.
tools, and then go back to where you're from.
Like more of an
What,
intensive type of experience.
yeah. So what makes
Okay.
us different is we are building that community with local veterans in the local church
Yeah.
and providing that place for them to have that space on a regular basis. So
Yeah. And now at the church, how often do those meetings happen? I think I
weekly,
know we were supposed to record Thursday, so I have a sense probably weekly. Is there a get
yeah,
together or is it okay? Kind of a weekly evening meeting, and is there? I've not attended. Is it time of worship and prayer and teaching and fellowship, or how is a Venture Vets meeting organized, or what does it look like?
yeah. So what we kind of played with some things over our first year, figuring out
Yeah.
what worked and what didn't work.
Hmm.
And we kind of ended up narrowing it down to the four things that we felt were the most impactful and that the veterans got the most out of.
Okay.
And so now we've divided, the month up into 4 weeks. And so the first week of the month, we do what we call veteran stories.
Okay.
Different veteran every month will tell their story from childhood to now and the events that have shaped them. You know, whether it was in the military, out of the military,
Yeah.
it all kind of comes together because there's just so much power in being able to look back at your life
Hmm.
and identify those things that have shaped who you are
So
and who you are.
that sounds really in depth. Like a really, I mean, that's not like a 5 minute talk. Probably that's probably like a longer dive and reflection on your life, right?
Yeah, the average is about 45 minutes to an hour that a
Yeah.
vet tells their story.
Wow.
And then on the other side of it, there's a lot of power in being able to hear other people's stories, and
Okay.
it
Yeah.
builds that community. You understand each other better. You're able to, um, you know that veteran at a deeper level,
Yeah.
and yeah, and it just it's so powerful.
Yeah. As you were designing or putting together Venture Vets, what led you to want to have a whole quarter of your days together to be devoted to a veteran's story? Like what was behind that decision?
I think it was the first time I told my story.
Okay.
I realized that just how powerful it was for me,
Yeah.
and to be able to see how God has shaped everything that's
Hmm.
happened, good and bad, to who I am now, and how it's equipped me to be who I am now. So,
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I interrupted there. You said there are kind of four different things. One is the story. What are the other three?
yeah. So then so in the second week of the month, I'll prepare 15-20 minute lesson out of the Bible
Okay.
that applies to life, applies to the veterans.
Hmm.
And I'll teach that lesson. Like, for example, tomorrow night we'll be, doing Ephesians 6 of the armor of God.
Okay.
Uh, very easy to apply to
Applicable. Yeah.
spiritual warriors. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also very important. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
we'll teach it 15, 20 minutes and then have a discussion. And the first couple of times we did that, like I had like questions to kind of guide the discussion in case it
Hmm.
like died off, and like the veterans just carried the conversation themselves. And
The conversation never died, huh?
yeah, it's like there comes a point where I'm like, okay, well, let's wrap it up now.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's about a 45-minute discussion that they have on that 15,
Yeah.
20-minute lesson that it's taught. So that's the second week. So
Okay.
helping them to build tools and grow in their knowledge of the scriptures, and when they discuss it, like it really helps it to sink in. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then the third and fourth week of the months, what would happen there?
oh yeah, I guess we should keep going, huh? Yeah.
Well, you got you've teased 4 weeks here. I want to know what they are. So,
Yeah, so the third week we watch like a video series from somebody. So
okay.
like right now we're working through one called "Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table" by Louis
Okay.
Giglio.
Okay.
And those are, again, 15, 20-minute lessons, and then we have a discussion on those because they like hearing other people besides me sometimes.
Too much Mike. Too much Mike
Exactly.
is too much. It's just
Yeah.
too much.
So we get someone else's voice in there, and
Okay.
then we have a discussion off
Yeah.
off of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the fourth week we take, and this, so the first and fourth weeks are my favorite.
Okay.
So the fourth week we
All that
take,
Bible stuff, not very interesting.
no, it's good. It's good. But like
I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
I think the bookends of the month are the most powerful.
Hmm.
So the fourth week we take our veteran community into a local senior living center,
Okay.
and we bridge the gap between the veterans that we have coming to venture vets at the church and the old timers there in the senior living center.
Yeah. Okay.
And we get to share some of their stories. We've got
Yeah.
a 102-year-old World War II vet that was
Hmm.
um, in the Ardennes forest with you know
Yeah. Battle of the Bulge, right?
Yeah, Battle of
Yeah.
the Bulge. So we got a Korean war vet who was at the Frozen Chosen, and to be able to share in their lives and in their stories it's so
Mhm.
cool. And
Yeah.
those guys love having us come. Like we hear from the director of the senior living center how much they enjoy
Hmm.
being able to meet with the veterans and just talk about things
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And this about me, Mike, but I am just come from an unmilitary background. Not anti, just
Yeah.
unmilitary. Just not. I don't have people that are close to me that are in the military, close family members that are actively serving. So it's a bit of a different world for me. I am as a trained historian, so of course military history is a part of that. So, but I look at all of this very much from the as an outsider to this. One of the things that struck me a number of years ago, I think it might have been the first time that I visited Pearl Harbor. And growing up on the East Coast, you learn about things like Pearl Harbor, and you think, I'm never. I mean, you don't even imagine you're ever going to be there. So me being able to be there in that space and actually kind of taking that in, I think was very interesting. And we took the little ferry out to the Arizona. I don't know if you've been before, but that's the ship that it's one of the ships that sunk, and it's still there. There's the memorial on top of it, and one of the things that I found was interesting, if this is correct, if I understood it correctly, was that if you served in Pearl Harbor or on the Arizona, you can still have your remain. There's very few of them left, I think, but you can still have your remains interred there,
Hmm.
on the Arizona on the memorial. And my thought at the moment was, wow, some of these guys, who might be having this done now were 18, 19, 20, 17, at the time. They kind of
Yeah.
lied in the forums and got there early or whatever. And to have that one day, that one experience, define your life in such an important way, or those few years, because you think about, especially these older veterans, it made me think somebody who's 102 years old. I mean, Bastogne was a long time ago. And as a
Yeah.
percentage of their life, unless they served for, maybe they were in the service for decades, I don't know. But if not, if they were just wartime service, it's a relatively small percentage of their life. And yet this is so defined
Yeah.
some of their
We
experience.
we just had the 80th anniversary of D-Day last week.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it was funny. One of our employees here who's retiring, we had a little retirement reception. His father, who was still alive, 96, 98, was in taking the troops to the shore that day on D-Day. And it was June 6th that this retirement reception was, and he mentioned his dad as a D-Day veteran. It just blew my mind. There are very few of them left, and it just blew my mind. And how these things can come to have a certain power over us. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it brings a certain definition to things, especially if you've been, like yourself, a much longer member of the armed services. It really, it has an effect. I mean, do you find, I guess that's not a question, I was just monologuing there, I suppose, but do you find that veterans, by and large, really define themselves as veterans in some powerful and tangible way? And does it matter how long they were in, or do you still think there's like a commonality there?
It doesn't matter if you were in for 2 years in Vietnam, like one of our Vietnam vets, or if you were in 22 years like myself. Yes, the veterans very much identify with that piece of their life. And there's a couple reasons behind that I suspect.
Okay.
One is that was a point in life where they experienced genuine, true brotherhood and community.
Okay. Yeah.
You did life with a group of people every part of your life, the good, the bad, the painful, the great, the funny. And you shared all of those experiences together. And when you leave that, especially now, and come into the way our country is right now, where it's so isolated and people don't like to be involved in other people's lives and have that, everything's very superficial and face value. And you don't find that depth of community very often in our culture.
Yeah.
And actually, I was reading a study that was just done in April of this year that was suggesting that the suicide rate among veterans, which is one of the highest in the country, is driven not from PTSD, but from loneliness. Okay. From missing that brotherhood and that camaraderie and being in a world that's so isolated and lonely. And so there's also the piece where while you were in the military, that you had a purpose. You had a mission that was bigger than you. Whether you believed in why we were in Iraq or not, or Vietnam or not, you were still there and you were fighting for the guys on your right and left. And that was a big enough mission that was bigger than yourself.
There was a certain clarity to it, I guess, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You knew your purpose. And you had your identity. That's who you were. And then when you take that uniform off, all of a sudden you stripped away that identity, and the veterans remember that. They remember the purpose. They remember the community. They remember the identity. And so it very much shapes who they are for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear you talk these key words: community, identity, purpose, because you could say these are in some sense kingdom words too, right? I mean, the community of the kingdom of God, who we are, who we are as people in the image of God, and people who follow Jesus, and our purpose, what God's plans are for us. So especially on identity. So one of the things you talked about, I think earlier, was helping people find their identity in Christ instead of just in the military. Obviously, clearly, being a venture vets group, there's a part of their identity, part of who they are, that is marked by their veteran experience.
Oh, absolutely.
Bad or ugly and all of that. How do you go about helping people begin to reframe identity not just in the military, but in Christ? Like, what is your process, and how do you help people walk through that process?
Yeah. So one of the things they do, so you get a lot of vets that get tied up in like, you know, I'm a veteran and like they're tied to that past,
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
they get out and the VA labels them with or diagnoses them with PTSD, which my own personal opinion is overdiagnosed, but we're not going to get into that on this. Uh,
Another podcast. Yeah.
right. But you get that diagnosis of PTSD, and now all of a sudden I'm a vet with PTSD,
Yeah.
and as long as that's who you are, you can never move forward from that.
Okay. You could.
And so you start
The
to,
identity can be on that. Like, this is who I am. You know.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so the trick is to start helping them to see that you're not just a veteran, you're not just a vet with PTSD or whatever it is. That you're more than that. Those are things that have happened that have shaped who you are,
Hmm.
but they're not your identity. Your identity is who Jesus Christ says you are.
Mm.
And then when you start to speak those truths into their lives, then you can start to speak that, that you're a veteran healing from PTSD because
Yeah.
Jesus is helping you to heal and to move forward.
Yeah.
Or in your identity is in Christ as his son, as his warrior, as his, and so you begin to shift that from identifying with those things of the past to identifying with who they are now and who Jesus says they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so let's backtrack a little bit. Before 2 years ago, there was an Adventure Vets group. How did this come together? How did this happen? How did you start it?
So um, I think we might have to go back into my story a little bit. Is that
Okay.
okay?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
So in 2006 in Iraq, I had a soldier. We called him Raider. Raider was a pastor's kid,
Okay.
and he was kind of like me in the Marines, like going as far the other direction from Jesus as he could.
Okay.
And this is about the time where I was starting to find my faith. And so this led
You were
to,
crossing paths a little bit.
yes. And so I was in charge of Raider. And so this led to some very fascinating conversations that we had. So there is a lot of downtime in combat as well.
Okay.
And boredom where you're waiting for things to happen.
I think I've heard a definition of war, something like a lot of standing around combined with moments of sheer terror. I think is how that was the definition. But yeah.
Pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in one of those standing around moments,
Mm-hmm.
we had a conversation about faith. It was a really in-depth conversation, and this is the first time that I had ever heard God speak to me.
Okay.
And he told me that before we left Iraq, Raider would know him.
Okay.
And I was so certain I had heard God tell me that I went and called his dad in Arizona and told his dad that God told me his son was going to know him before we left Iraq.
Yeah.
So you'd fast forward a couple months, and we got in a huge firefight on the Jabari Peninsula.
Okay.
Raider got shot in the chest twice. Medevaced him off. He died on the operating table in Balad a couple hours later.
Okay.
And I was crushed. I thought God let me down. It was like, you said he was going to know you.
Uh-huh.
And so a couple weeks after that, I had another soldier who had been injured doing dumb soldier things. And we had to get him okay to roll on missions with us again. So we were back at that base, and I was waiting on him, and I ended up talking to this flight surgeon who was standing there. Turns out it was the flight surgeon that had worked on Raider.
Okay.
And I asked him, if anything we could tell the family that he maybe said before he passed, and he said, yeah. And so we go by last names in the military.
Okay.
Last names is on our uniforms. Nobody goes by first names. So that this flight surgeon has no idea my name is Mike. He just knows I'm Sergeant Cumming.
Yeah.
And so he said, yeah, every time he tried to talk, he just kept saying, tell Mike I know God. And obviously, as soon as we got back to our base, I had to go immediately to the phones and call his dad again and tell his dad this story.
Yeah.
And when I called his dad told me that the moment I called him, he was in his office praying. and he told God he needed something more. He needed Sergeant Cumming to call him. And that's when I called him to tell him that story.
Wow.
That was the moment where I knew without a doubt for the rest of my life that God was real.
Hmm.
So we did another, more deployments, a lot of combat,
Yeah.
and I started to crack, and kind of started to spiral with my own PTSD.
Okay.
And made some poor decisions, moral decisions, and just really bought into this lie from the enemy that I had blown it so much that I couldn't be used by God ever again.
Okay.
And so I essentially walked away from my faith for 10 years.
All right.
And, fast forward 10 years, and it's January of 2020, and I was kind of a shell of myself.
Yeah.
And I came home to visit my mom and brother in the Seattle area. And while I was here, really felt this urge that I needed to come back to Washington State. And so I was in Utah at the time. And I went back to Utah, and so at this point I've got an ex-wife and 3 kids. So,
Okay. Okay.
Who we get along with great, which is good. So, but I went back and I told them, I was like, what would you guys think if I could, transfer up to the Seattle area back home and just kind of start again up there? All of my kids and their mom was like, if you can go start over in Washington, you need to go.
Okay.
So June 2020, I came back up here right in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
Which was perfect because I didn't want to be around anybody.
Introverts loved COVID, I guess.
Yeah. And so I started spending a lot of time up in the mountains with my dog.
Oh, nice.
And that was where I just really started looking around and just seeing the beauty of God's creation. And that kind of stirred my heart a little bit. And I started to pray, which led me to start reading my Bible again. And then you fast forward to December of 2020, and I had a dream. And God spoke to me in the dream, and he told me, he's like, "You're my warrior." He's like, "You are deeply wounded right now.
Yeah.
And I've got you in a place where only the people you want to know where you are know where you are."
Yeah.
He said, "This is your time to heal, and this is your time to get ready to go back into the battle." Yeah. And I woke up from that dream, and it was so real. I called my brother, who is a pastor in Snoqualmie, and told him about it. He's like, "You need to write that down." So I did. Fast forward a few more months, and I also, throughout all of this, was like very hard set that I was not going back to church. Like, I'm going to find faith. I'll pray. I'll read my Bible, but I'm not going back to church.
Don't send me back there.
Yeah. And so it was March of 2021 now, and God told me to go back to church. And so I'm still in this really like stupid, naive phase where I'm like negotiating with God. And I was like, fine, I'll go, but I'm only going for a month. And if I don't like it, I'm not going back.
That's very Old Testament of you. Like where Abraham is like negotiating with God over the destruction of Sodom, right?
Yeah.
How about this, God?
Yeah. So I went to a church, and I went for a month, and I was like, well, that experiment's over.
Well, I did it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was talking with a friend about it, and they're like, well, you only went to one church. I was like, so? They're like, well, I think for it to be fair, you should at least give one other church a try. So I was like, fine.
Yeah. Okay.
So I drove by Venture all the time.
Okay.
And so I was like, I'll go try this Venture church. I like the name. It sounds cool. And I see it every day. So went to Venture, and Pastor Dye was speaking my first Sunday there.
Okay.
And I remember, I'm looking for reasons not to come back. And so Pastor Dye's message, I'm sure, was great. But she started with a story, and it wasn't even like this that her story was off. It was just like, I thought it was a dumb story. And I was like, well, that's that. And so I had lunch with my brother that day, And he was like, "Oh, you went to Venture?" He's like, "Did you meet Morgan Butcher?" And I was like, "No, but I saw his big head talking on the screen on like a video announcement thing." And he's like, "Oh, you got to meet Morgan. You're gonna love Morgan. And we did youth camps together when I was a youth pastor. Blah 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 blah." And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm not going back." And he's like, "Why?" So I told him why, and he's like, "That's why you're not going back." I was like, "Yes." He's like, "That's a dumb reason. You need to go back and you need to at least meet Morgan."
I love it.
I was like, "Fine, I'll go back again." So I went back again, and Brandon was speaking, and I'd never heard anybody preach and teach like Brandon, and I was hooked. And so that got me into the Venture Church.
Yeah.
I
And
started growing.
that was 2021.
Yeah,
Okay.
started growing quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was March of 2022. He's not there anymore, but Chris Cruz had talked to me about that maybe I should start a group for veterans at the church right before I was getting ready to retire in April of 2022.
Okay.
And I was like, I don't know. I was like, fine. So we started. I agreed. I'm thinking like really small scale, like handful of vets. We're just going to go like swap war stories at a pub or coffee shop or something. And like
Mm-hmm.
nothing like very substantial is my
Yeah.
initial thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had been dating a gal at the time who broke up with me, and it was like the most devastating thing in my life in the recent times there. And I was praying about it, and God was like, "Am I enough for you?"
Mm.
And I was like, I know the answer should be yes, but I also know that I can't lie to you, and the answer is no.
Yeah. Radical
And
honesty. I like it.
yeah. And so I knew that I needed to deal with that. And so I spent a lot of time working through that particular issue. And as soon as I was able to say, yes, you're enough, this peace like I never felt. And then all of a sudden, like Venture Vets got legs to it and started. It was like God was waiting for me to like be all in on him.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "All right, now we're gonna go for a ride." And so on May 2020, Memorial Day weekend of May 2022, I stood in front of the church and announced that we were launching a like actual veterans ministry.
Yeah.
What is kind of significant, what was super significant about that I didn't pick up until a while later was that was 10 years to the day, Memorial Day weekend of 2012. I was escorted by the police to the VA hospital and held on a psych hold.
Okay.
It's exactly 10 years later, like I'm standing in front of the church launching this ministry.
Wow.
And then there's just things started snowballing after that. We got put in my head that maybe I should try for credentials. The assemblies gave them to me. And and now I'm working on an MDiv at GCU.
We'll edit that part out, I guess. No, that's great. That's great that you're going forward for further education to help support. I mean, in part, it's going to support the ministry you're doing with vets, which is great, and ministry in general. So, well, thank you for that kind of sketch there. That's helpful to see. I mean, how it's tied into your own experience, and then you're also able to draw from your own experience and what the experiences you have and God's done in your life, and kind of then pay it back, if you will, or use that to help shepherd fellow vets. What would you say? And you talked about this a little bit already, but what are your main goals, or what would you consider to be Jesus' main goals for Venture Vets? Like what is another way to say this is, in 5 years, let's say you have a new vet come today, and in a couple of years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what will you see in their life? What will you see in their faith that lets you know that this ministry has been faithful and successful in what it's hoped to do?
Yeah. So one, they'll know Jesus. They will have a tight-knit community that they are doing life with and being supported and supporting.
Yeah.
They will understand who they are and who God says they are and find their identity solely in Jesus.
Yeah.
And they will have their own purpose that God's put on their heart that they're fulfilling.
Yeah.
and we'll see, maybe hopefully in 5 years, like there's other vets leading venture vets here
Yeah.
because God's put it on their hearts, and venture vets is in churches all over the country. So
Yeah. So about that, you and I have talked about this a little bit too. It's my understanding that, to your knowledge, there aren't many or any ministries like this out there that you've encountered. Is that right?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
But why do you,
I,
why do you think that is? I mean, it seems like, again, I'm not a veteran at all, but it seems like a fairly obvious thing to do, right? Why do you think there aren't a lot of groups like this out there?
I think it's just been overlooked.
Okay.
I don't think it's not that anybody hasn't thought it was important.
Hmm.
I just think for whatever reason, um, it just hasn't been on anybody's heart that this is something we actually need. And
Yeah.
now that we're doing it, I see the need all over the country. Like we have
Yeah.
vets from all over the country following us online, and
Wow.
talking about how they want something like that where they're at.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. That's great. So, well, we've talked about this as well, but so for someone like me who is, I'm a credentialed minister like you. I'm not serving in a official pastoral capacity at Venture right now, though I'm sort of, I'm there in the mix, and I serve as our dean of college and ministry here at Northwest. But I'm also somebody who has no military background, no military experience, no understanding. I mean, I'm so naive probably when it comes to. I mean, I can understand the stories and hear and listen and things like that, but it's just not been my experience. How can people like me, people who are not veterans, um, support, encourage, bless brothers and sisters in our churches who are veterans? How are there any special things or things we should keep in mind? Or I don't know. I'm just asking. Like, this is not my world,
yeah,
but these are people whom God loves, and God calls me to love as well. And how can I best do that?
well, I think one way would be to ask and be willing to listen to their stories,
Okay.
um, to let them really be heard, and
Yeah.
to really feel like they've been known. And
Hmm.
it's not just the thank you for your service, but you know
Yeah.
they taking it to that next level, and really understanding what or I mean, you can't really understand, but trying to understand what they've been
Yeah.
through. And obviously it's up to the individual vet whether they're willing to share those things or not.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But and then including them in community,
Yeah.
'cause that's the biggest thing they're missing is community, like true community. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people in our church are missing that too, not like venture specifically, but in the church as a whole.
Hmm. Okay.
um,
Yeah.
we're,
Okay.
we're just focused on the veteran aspect of it with venture vets. But
Yeah. So in a certain sense, what I hear you saying is care for them like you would care for anyone, as a brother and sister in Christ. But
yeah,
also, as you have awareness of their own story, and maybe particularly, and I know the word can be overused, but traumas that they have experienced, or frankly, I think about this sometimes, like the things that you have seen and done and been involved in or adjacent to are part of your story. And I don't know that I have anything quite even close to compare to some of those things. And I I think there also I would say pastorally from my side, probably a sense of humility too. One of the things they teach, I don't know if they've taught you this in a seminary class yet, is be careful about saying, "Oh, I understand what you're going through." Do you? Do you
yeah,
really? Because I don't understand everything you've gone through, Michael. And I don't say that disrespectfully, but I say I want to listen, but I've never been in your shoes in the same way. And kind of that respect to listen and try to empathize the best we can, even if we don't completely have that same experience. That would be a thought that I
yeah.
would
I
have.
think
Yeah.
I think a better way to empathize would be like, I can't imagine what that would have been like, because
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Someone like me, my experience of the military is from what I've seen on television and movies and read about in history books.
Yeah.
I haven't even seen many documentaries. So, like, I mean, I'm sure it's not all Full Metal Jacket all the time, but although maybe, right?
There's
So,
moments.
yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think, but seriously, thank you for what you're doing here. I think this is interesting. And it's really fascinating for me that this kind of ministry, as far as we know, isn't happening more. And so I'm excited for the opportunity maybe to for Venture Vets to expand its reach and to be able to minister to veterans elsewhere in our region, in our country?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not just the church; it's the whole country's behind on figuring this
Mm,
stuff out. Like I told you, that study was just done in April of this year that
yeah,
talked about the driving piece behind veterans suicide is the loneliness,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's we've been 20 plus years at war, and now
yeah.
we're figuring this out. Like,
Well, it's when you were talking about that earlier, it made me think about my college experience. Now, I am not trying to create a equality between 20 years in the military and 4 years at an undergraduate college. But I mean, I was for 4 years. I was at a in a it was a college called Houghton College. It was kind of in the middle of nowhere in New York State, Western New York, and a Christian college. And one of the lowest years in my life felt like the year after I graduated college, because all of those relationships that I'd built, those deep friendships that I had, even that daily, I suppose, schedule and rhythm was gone, and it wasn't coming back, not in the same way.
exactly. Yes.
And I think sometimes I think for maybe I've even said, I think probably said to graduating college students, like, be ready because this next year might be tough for you.
Yeah.
And we weren't even probably interacting at near the depth of emotion, the depth of experience, the depth of loss, that is probably a commonplace in military, certainly wartime service. So yeah, um, that's got to be. I mean, the loneliness. I mean, yeah, it sounds so basic, but basic doesn't mean bad. It just means fundamental. It's a fundamental thing that needs to be considered.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, Venture Vet's now 2 years been around, and you've already diagnosed the need for more, and other people have said we would like to expand this to our church, to our community. What are your dreams? What are your plans for next steps for Venture Vets, both in our church, but also maybe expanding the reach of what this ministry can do?
Yeah. So, well, one of the dreams of Venture Vets at the church, I've already uh, been able to see
Okay.
come to fruition over this last spring. My son is in track and field, and so I was gone for about 2 months of Venture Vets at his track meets,
Yeah,
and the veterans that we've been discipling all stepped up and took on a
that's
different
great.
week
That's great.
of that calendar and led Venture Vets without a hitch for 2 months without me present.
Wow, that's good,
And
man.
that like that's what I want to see is like these guys being able to take it and run with it on their own. They don't need me.
Yeah.
So
It's
um,
it's not the Sergeant Cumming Venture Vets, it's Venture Vets.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Then the other thing is like I said, like we know there's a need and a desire for this across the country. And
Yeah.
so we're starting to work on packaging the materials that we're using, the lessons we're teaching, the format, the monthly
Mhm.
breakdown into
Yeah.
into a package where we could essentially hand another church like, here's your first
Yeah.
year of Venture Vets,
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
where they wouldn't necessarily have to have someone who's like credentialed leading it. Like
Yeah.
they've got the lessons I've already written. They've got the video series that we're using. They just have to be able to just plug and play
Mhm.
and be willing to step in, and then and through that they'll grow as a leader and
Yeah.
develop as well. So
So as we come to a close here, Mike, obviously we've talked about this ministry, a little bit about your story a lot. There may be questions I haven't asked or some final thoughts that you may have to share. So anything else you'd like to add today to kind of close out our time together?
yeah, I would say that if you're a veteran out there or you're a
Mhm.
church out there that's interested in veterans ministries, please reach out to me and let's start the conversation about how you could have Venture Vets or a ministry similar to Venture Vets at your church as well.
Yeah. Okay. So if people like what they've heard or they're interested in this ministry, would like to connect with you, where can we find you or the ministry on the internet? Where can they go to?
They go to ourventure.church.
Okay.
Under the staff, you'll find me listed there, or you can just email me at vets@ourventure.church.
Okay. Any social media presence or any websites or anything at this point?
So we've got a ministries page on the Our Venture.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So,
Okay. All right. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes for the episode, folks, so you can see it there. Well, Mike, thanks so much for being with us here today. Thank you for the ministry you are doing to serve our veterans, and hey, thanks for doing this at our church too. It's kind of fun to see this taking root at Venture.
well, thanks for having me. And you said this is coming out 4th of July week.
Yeah, 4th of July week. So yeah, it's
So,
coming out then.
well, everybody enjoy the freedoms that the veterans have fought for you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, man. We'll see you next week at church.